The hangar was vast, its metallic walls shimmering under the dim glow of suspended lights that seemed to flicker with a life of their own. Massive spacecraft, sleek and otherworldly, were docked in perfect formation. Alien engineers, with their elongated bodies and glistening black eyes, moved silently, their movements fluid as though they belonged to a different plane of gravity. Captain Anton Warren stood at attention, but his mind raced with unease. His military uniform clung tightly to his muscled frame, a symbol of Earth's defense forces. His steel-gray eyes scanned the surroundings, particularly the towering alien vessel in the center. It resembled a smooth disk, hovering slightly above the ground, as if defying the very laws of physics. Surrounding the ship, other beings stood, tall, slender figures with skin like polished silver, shimmering beneath the hangar's artificial light. One of these beings stood directly in front of Anton, its stature intimidating and elegant. The alien wore a long, flowing garment adorned with strange symbols, yet there was an air of authority around it that Anton couldn't deny. This was the general, the leader of their delegation. Anton's gaze lingered on the creature. His thoughts swirled. Why would humanity allow themselves to collaborate so closely with these outsiders? The idea of saluting, showing respect to something so foreign, felt like a betrayal of all he stood for. The flags of Earth and the alien world, Sidera, hung above them, symbols of a fragile alliance that many humans, Anton included, were still hesitant to accept. His jaw tightened as he watched the general step forward. Captain Warren. The voice was transmitted telepathically, echoing in Anton's mind rather than reaching his ears. The general's black, reflective eyes met his. You have not saluted. For a long moment, Anton remained motionless. His hand hovered near his forehead, but he refused to complete the gesture. His heart raced. I serve humanity. I won't bow to them. A cold sweat gathered at the nape of his neck. There was an eerie silence in the hangar as the alien general observed him with a calmness that made Anton's defiance feel almost insignificant. Then, with slow precision, the general reached into a compartment on its chest and produced a small, folded piece of parchment, something so analog in an age of digital screens that it caught Anton off guard. The alien handed him the note. Read this, the general said in that same telepathic voice, and your perspective will change. Anton snatched the note, irritated by the creature's confidence, but his hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. The script was alien, but the translation device embedded in his ear helped him decipher the words. As his eyes traced the delicate symbols, his expression shifted, confusion spreading across his face. The message was cryptic, yet powerful. It read, There are battles you know nothing of. The cost of ignorance is far greater than the cost of pride. He looked up from the note, his gaze drawn to the alien vessel behind the general. The ship, he had been told, was one of the few to survive the siege of Velen, a battle fought on a distant planet he had never seen, yet one that had nearly destroyed both their species. Suddenly, a flood of images filled his mind. Flashing scenes of destruction, flames licking at crumbling cities, soldiers, human and alien alike, fighting side by side against an unseen force. He could hear their screams, feel the scorching heat of the battlefields. The horror of the alien war was overwhelming. Anton gasped, dropping the note, his knees weakening under the weight of the memories. But they weren't his memories, they belonged to the general. You shared this with me? Anton stammered, his voice hoarse as he tried to steady himself. He could barely process what he had seen, and yet, the weight of it felt so real, so raw. The general regarded him with the same calm composure, but there was a flicker of something else in those inky black eyes, something resembling understanding. Human pride blinds you, Captain. We do not seek your submission, only your cooperation. The threat we face is far greater than you can comprehend. This is not a war for dominance. It is a war for survival. Anton's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to piece together the fragments of the alien's memories. He had been briefed, of course, about the intergalactic conflicts, about humanity's desperate need for allies in the face of an unknown enemy. But nothing he had heard, nothing he had been trained for, could prepare him for the sheer terror of what the general had shown him. He straightened his back, taking a deep breath, and stared at the general once more. "You're asking for more than just a salute, aren't you?" The general's long, bony fingers curled slightly, a sign of approval in their culture. "We are asking for unity, and that begins with mutual respect." Anton's mind raced. He had never been one to fold under pressure, nor had he ever been one to back down from his beliefs. But what he had just witnessed, the carnage, the devastation, it wasn't something he could ignore. His sense of duty to Earth warred with the realization that they were, perhaps, only a small piece in a much larger puzzle. A puzzle that, if left incomplete, could result in their annihilation. He stood there, motionless for a moment, wrestling with the weight of his next move. Then, with a reluctant sigh, Anton slowly lifted his hand, his fingers brushing his forehead in a crisp salute. The general's expression didn't change. "Good. Now we may begin." Days after that encounter, Anton found himself on board the Siderean vessel, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The note had never left his side, its cryptic message haunting him. The Earth-Siderian alliance had always been controversial, but now, after experiencing the general's memories, Anton understood its true purpose. The fleet of alien ships that hovered above Earth wasn't here as a display of power. They were here as a shield against something far more dangerous than any political tension or human defiance. Reports had begun to filter in from outposts in the outer systems, rumors of a massive force moving silently through space, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. Planets were disappearing, not just destroyed, but erased, as though they had never existed. Entire star systems had gone dark. This was the threat the general had hinted at, and it was closing in fast. Anton had been reassigned, along with a joint Earth-Siderian task force, to investigate the phenomenon. The mission brief was vague: gather intelligence, report back, avoid engagement. But Anton could sense the underlying fear. Humanity's fleet was not prepared for what was coming. No one was. As their ship glided through the void, Anton found himself standing alongside the general once more, their previous tension now replaced by a mutual, if uneasy, understanding. "Captain Warren," the general's voice resonated again in his mind. "You are troubled." "I don't like walking into a fight I don't understand," Anton replied, his gaze fixed on the stars. "You still haven't told me what exactly we're up against." The general remained silent for a moment, then spoke with a gravity that chilled Anton to his core. "It is not a fight, Captain. It is extinction." The word hung in the air like a death sentence, and for the first time, Anton felt the full weight of his decision to be here. Whatever was coming, it was something far beyond human reckoning, something that not even the combined forces of Earth and Sidera could hope to defeat. Yet here he was, preparing to face it head-on. The Siderian ship was deathly quiet, save for the occasional hum of distant machinery that barely broke the eerie stillness. Anton Warren stood at the observation deck, his reflection cast against the endless void of stars outside. His fingers unconsciously traced the note in his pocket, the same note that had shattered his pride and dragged him into an alliance he once swore he'd never be part of. His mind replayed the general's last words. "It is not a fight, Captain. It is extinction." Anton couldn't shake the weight of those words. Extinction. Final. Unrelenting. Total. He'd faced countless battles, stared death in the face more times than he could count, but this was different. He wasn't just fighting for Earth now, or even humanity. He was fighting for the right to exist. He snorted at the thought, a dry, humorless laugh escaping his lips. "Hell of a promotion," he muttered, shaking his head. What a cosmic joke this all was, one that seemed too cruel to be real. But the truth was staring him in the face, in the form of the silent, distant stars and the alien technology humming all around him. The enemy was coming, and it didn't care about his doubts or his discomfort. He turned from the window as the door slid open behind him with a gentle hiss. Sergeant Morales stepped inside, her face drawn tight, though her eyes flickered with an odd mixture of excitement and dread. She was one of the few humans who seemed to relish the idea of being out here, on an alien ship, facing down the unknown. But even she wasn't immune to the tension. "Sir," she said, snapping to attention, "you're going to want to see this." Anton sighed and nodded, following her through the long metallic corridors of the ship. As they walked, his mind wandered. He couldn't help but think about how absurd all of this was. He had gone from being a decorated officer on Earth, commanding respect and admiration, to walking the halls of an alien vessel, surrounded by beings who looked more like something out of a nightmare than anything human. And yet, here they were, allies in a fight they both barely understood. "What's the status?" Anton asked as they rounded a corner, his voice betraying none of his internal conflict. Morales glanced at him. "The scouts have returned from the Velan system. What they brought back, well, it's something you're going to want to see for yourself." Anton's stomach twisted, but he kept his face neutral. They entered a small chamber where a holographic map of the galaxy flickered in midair. Several Siderians stood around it, their silver eyes focused intently on the projections. One of them, a figure Anton recognized as the general's chief strategist, nodded in acknowledgement as he and Morales approached. "Captain Warren," the strategist said, his telepathic voice still unsettling despite the weeks Anton had spent aboard the ship. "We have analyzed the data from the scouts. The Velan system no longer exists." Anton blinked. "What do you mean, no longer exists?" The strategist raised a hand, and the holographic map zoomed in on the Velan system. Except there was no system. Where once there had been several planets and moons, swirling gas giants and asteroid belts, there was now nothing. Just empty space. It was as if the entire system had been erased. "Is this some kind of joke?" Anton asked, his voice harsher than he intended. "No joke," the strategist replied calmly. "What you see is real." Velan was one of the first systems to fall to the entity we now call the Devourer. It does not destroy in the traditional sense. It consumes, leaving nothing behind. Not even atoms. Anton felt his pulse quicken, a creeping sense of dread curling in his gut. "And this is what's heading for Earth?" The strategist nodded. "It will not stop with Earth. This entity, this force, is unlike anything we've ever encountered. It does not negotiate, it does not retreat, and it does not leave survivors." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Morales shifted uncomfortably beside Anton. "Sir, if I may, what exactly is our plan? Because I've got to be honest, I don't see how we fight something that can literally erase planets." Anton didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure there was an answer to give, but he couldn't let his team, or the Siderians, see his doubt. The truth was, this wasn't a fight they were equipped to handle. They were out of their depth, floundering in a cosmic ocean that was about to swallow them whole. And yet, they had no choice but to try. "Sergeant," Anton said finally, keeping his voice steady, "we do what we always do. We survive. We adapt. And we fight like hell." The strategist inclined his head slightly, a gesture Anton had come to recognize as approval. "There is one possibility," the alien said, his voice a soft hum in Anton's mind. "We believe the Devourer has a core, something that drives its hunger, something central to its existence. If we can find that core, we may be able to destroy it." Anton raised an eyebrow. "And how, exactly, are we supposed to find this core? Let me guess. Fly into the heart of the beast?" The strategist's silence was all the confirmation Anton needed. "Great," Anton muttered, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "So our brilliant plan is to fly straight into the jaws of death and hope we hit something important." Morales snickered quietly beside him. "Sounds like a typical Tuesday for us, sir." Despite the situation, Anton found himself grinning. Yeah, just another day in paradise. But the humor quickly faded as the gravity of their mission settled over them once more. They were going to face something incomprehensible, something that had already consumed entire star systems without so much as a trace. And their only plan was to dive straight into the unknown. The irony of it all wasn't lost on Anton. He had spent his entire career fighting to keep humanity safe, pushing back against enemies that could at least bleed, that could be reasoned with, or even feared. But now, they were up against something that had no soul, no weakness. Something that wasn't alive in the way they understood life. Yet, here he was, leading a mission that seemed destined for failure. Hell of a promotion, indeed. The ship was tense as preparations were made. Anton stood on the command deck, watching as the crew, both human and Siderean, worked side by side. The irony wasn't lost on him. How quickly enemies could become allies when facing a common threat. It reminded him of an old Earth saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." If only it were that simple. The general approached, his presence as commanding as ever. "We are ready to depart, Captain." Anton nodded, staring out at the vastness of space. "Do we have any idea what to expect when we reach the core?" The general tilted his head slightly, a gesture Anton had come to interpret as thoughtful. "No, but we must hope that we find something that can be destroyed. Otherwise, we're just walking into oblivion," Anton finished for him. He sighed deeply, the weight of the mission settling heavily on his shoulders. Not exactly a comforting thought. "We have faced impossible odds before," the general said, his voice calm, yet firm. "This is no different." Anton barked a bitter laugh. "No offense, but I've never faced anything that could eat a planet." "Nor have I," the general admitted, his eyes flickering with a strange, unreadable emotion. "But we have no choice. We must fight or be erased." Anton knew the general was right, but it didn't make the prospect any less terrifying. His mind raced with 1,000 possible outcomes, each more disastrous than the last. And yet, amidst the chaos in his head, a single thought kept pushing its way to the forefront. What if we succeed? What if, against all odds, they managed to destroy the Devourer? What if they found its core and blew it to hell? It was a slim hope, but sometimes, slim was all you needed. The Siderean ship approached the darkened sector of space where the Devourer was last seen. There was no sign of planets, stars, or even light. It was as if they had sailed into a cosmic void, an abyss that swallowed everything whole. Anton stood at the helm, his hands gripping the railing tightly as the ship's sensors pinged softly, searching for any sign of the enemy. But there was nothing, just a cold, empty nothingness that stretched out before them, vast and suffocating. "Any readings?" Anton asked, his voice low. The strategist, standing at a nearby console, shook his head. "Nothing. The Devourer leaves no trace." Anton's stomach churned with unease. "Then how do we find it?" Before the strategist could answer, the ship suddenly lurched violently, the lights flickering as alarms blared. Anton was thrown forward, his hands slamming against the console as he struggled to regain his balance. "What the hell was that?" he shouted, looking around at the panicked crew. Morales, who had managed to brace herself against a nearby wall, shouted back, "Sir, we've got company." Anton turned to the viewing screen just in time to see it. A massive, dark shape looming in the distance, its surface rippling and shifting like a living shadow. The Devourer. For a moment, all Anton could do was stare. The thing was enormous, far larger than any ship or planet he had ever seen. It seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if it were alive, but not alive in any way that made sense. "Target the core," Anton shouted, snapping out of his trance. "Fire everything we've got." The ship's cannons lit up, blasting toward the massive entity with everything they had. But the blasts were swallowed up by the darkness, disappearing without a trace. Anton's heart sank. This isn't going to work. And yet, they had no choice but to keep fighting. The general stood beside him, calm as ever, though his eyes were fixed on the Devourer with an intensity Anton hadn't seen before. "Do not give up hope, Captain. There is always a way." Anton wasn't sure he believed that anymore. But for the sake of his crew, and for the sake of humanity, he had to keep trying. The void outside the ship felt like a physical presence, silent, oppressive, suffocating. The Devourer loomed ahead, its dark mass shifting like a living shadow, absorbing all light and hope. It was the kind of creature that defied description, and yet, there it was, slowly consuming everything in its path. Anton Warren stood on the bridge of the Siderean vessel, his hands gripping the rail so tightly his knuckles turned white. His crew, both human and alien, stood frozen behind him, staring out at the impossible enemy before them. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. His breath felt heavy, his thoughts even heavier. The plan had been simple enough on paper. Find the Devourer's core, destroy it, and stop the thing from erasing the universe piece by piece. But as Anton stared at the colossal mass of darkness that shifted and twisted in space, he realized just how laughable that plan had been. This was not a battle they could win by force. This wasn't something they could outgun or outrun. And yet, they were here. And they had one last chance. The general stood beside him, his silver eyes fixed on the screen, his expression unreadable. Anton wondered what the alien was thinking. The Siderans, for all their strength, seemed as clueless as the humans when it came to understanding the Devourer. They had faced it once before, and they had barely survived. Now, they had thrown in their lot with humanity, hoping that together, they could find a way to stop the inevitable. "Captain," the general's voice echoed in Anton's mind, pulling him back to the present. "You know what must be done." Anton nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure he truly knew what the general meant. The ship's weapons were useless, their shields laughable. There was no way to outlast the Devourer, no way to fight it. Or was there? He glanced down at the note still tucked in his pocket, the one the general had given him back in the hangar, the one with the cryptic message that had haunted him ever since. "There are battles you know nothing of. The cost of ignorance is far greater than the cost of pride." That was it, wasn't it? The answer had been there all along. Ignorance. That was the key. The Devourer wasn't just some mindless force of destruction. It was intelligent, at least, in its own alien, incomprehensible way. It was playing a game they didn't even know they were in. A game where the rules didn't make sense, because they hadn't bothered to understand them. Anton's pulse quickened as a thought, absurd yet clear, began to form in his mind. They had been trying to fight this thing as if it were an enemy, something they could defeat through force or clever tactics. But what if that was the wrong approach? What if the only way to win was not to fight it at all? He turned to the general, his heart racing with the sheer insanity of what he was about to suggest. "We're looking at this all wrong." The general's gaze flickered toward him, a faint curiosity in his otherwise calm demeanor. "The Devourer," Anton continued, the words spilling out of him faster now. "It's not a predator. It's not destroying things out of malice or hunger. It's consuming information. It's searching for something." The general's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Anton took a deep breath, his mind racing as he pieced it together. "Look at the pattern. It's not just wiping out planets randomly. It's targeting systems with high concentrations of life, complex ecosystems, advanced civilizations. It's collecting data, like it's trying to understand something." "You believe it seeks knowledge?" the general asked, his telepathic voice carrying a note of skepticism. "Yes," Anton said, the idea becoming clearer with every word. "And the reason it hasn't stopped is because it hasn't found what it's looking for yet. It's not a monster. It's a search algorithm in a way. It's gathering information, testing theories. It's not trying to wipe us out. We're just collateral damage." The bridge fell silent as everyone processed Anton's words. He could feel the tension in the room shift as the crew began to see the possibility of it. The Devourer wasn't a mindless force of destruction. It was a puzzle. But what is it searching for? Morales asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was filled with a mix of fear and hope. Anton shook his head. "I don't know, but I think it's waiting for us to give it the answer." The general's gaze sharpened. "And what is that answer?" Anton felt the weight of the question settle on his shoulders. He didn't have the answer. Not yet, but he had a feeling they were close. So close. His mind flashed back to the memories the general had shared with him. The war on Velen, the devastation, the alliance formed in desperation. That's what had brought them here. But maybe that wasn't what the Devourer was interested in. Maybe it wasn't the wars, or the alliances, or the technology. Maybe it was something simpler. Something that connected all life, regardless of species or civilization. He thought about the note again, the one that had changed everything for him. The cost of ignorance. They had been ignorant, blind to the truth. But now, they had a chance to change that, to see things as they really were. He stepped forward, his hand reaching for the comm system. "I need to speak to the Devourer." The crew stared at him in disbelief. "Captain, that's—" Morales began, but Anton cut her off. "I know how it sounds," he said, his voice firm, "but this thing is intelligent. It's searching for something, and we need to talk to it." The general regarded him for a long moment before finally nodding. "Do it." Anton activated the ship's communication system, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure this would work. Hell, he wasn't even sure if the Devourer could understand them. But they had no other options. They were out of time. He spoke clearly, his voice steady despite the storm of doubt swirling inside him. "Devourer, we know you're searching for something. We don't know what it is, but we believe we can help you find it. We ask that you stop your destruction and communicate with us." For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, slowly, the dark mass of the Devourer began to shift. The shadows twisted and coiled, pulling back as something emerged from its depths, a glowing sphere of light, pulsing softly, like a heartbeat. The entire crew held their breath as the sphere moved closer to the ship, stopping just beyond the viewports. Anton could feel it, the presence of the Devourer. It wasn't like anything he had ever felt before. It was vast, incomprehensible, ancient. And yet, there was something else there, something that felt almost curious. He took a deep breath and spoke again. "What are you searching for?" The answer came, not in words, but in a flood of images and sensations that filled Anton's mind. He saw galaxies forming, stars dying, civilizations rising and falling. He saw the birth of the universe, the slow, inevitable march of time. And then he saw it, an image so simple, yet so profound. It was a hand, a human hand, reaching out, and then an alien hand, reaching back. Connection. That's what it had been searching for. Not knowledge, not data. It had been searching for something it had never experienced. Something that could only be found through understanding, through mutual recognition. Anton's breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him. It's looking for connection, for life, for something that can acknowledge it, recognize it as more than just a force of destruction. The general's eyes widened in understanding. "It is lonely." Anton nodded, the weight of it settling over him like a shroud. "All this time, it's been trying to communicate, to connect, and we've been fighting it, trying to destroy it, because we didn't understand." The glowing sphere pulsed again, its light softening, as if in agreement. Anton swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "We can end this." He stepped forward, placing his hand against the cold glass of the viewport. It was a gesture as old as time, a symbol of peace, of trust. And then, slowly, the sphere of light moved closer, until it touched the glass where Anton's hand rested. In that moment, everything changed. The darkness of the Devourer began to recede, pulling back into the sphere of light, which grew brighter and brighter until it was blinding. The crew shielded their eyes as the ship was bathed in the glow. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light disappeared. The Devourer was gone. Anton blinked, his heart racing as he stared out into the now empty void of space. There was nothing left. No darkness, no threat. Just the stars, shining quietly in the distance. The bridge erupted into cheers, the crew hugging and clapping one another on the back. They had done it. They had stopped the unstoppable. But Anton remained silent, his hands still resting against the glass. He had seen something in that final moment, a glimpse of something greater, something beyond even the Devourer. The general stepped beside him, his voice quiet. "What did you see?" Anton shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Not something I can explain, but I think we're going to be okay." The general nodded, his silver eyes glowing softly. "Yes, Captain, I believe we will." And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Anton believed it too. There was no threat left, no loose ends. Anton had found the answer in the most unexpected of places, not in violence, but in connection. The Devourer's search was over, and with it, so was the war. It was a final, absolute end. The universe was at peace, and for the first time in a long time, so was Anton.